This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Southern African countries to deploy troops in the latest effort to end an insurgency in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado. The United Nations warns that violence against aid workers in the Central African Republic is on the rise. And China issues a white paper on the practice of the Communist Party in respecting and protecting human rights. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Two more stories making headlines this hour. In business news, the news ratings agency Fitch downgrades Ghana's economic outlook from stable to negative. And in your sport, the stage is set for the WRC Safari Rally in Nairobi following Wednesday's shakedown. The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, has agreed to deploy forces to help end an insurgency in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado. The agreement was made at a one-day summit held in Maputo on Wednesday, while key discussions at the meeting included regional integration, cooperation, and development. Topping the agenda was the fight against terrorism in Mozambique. Over the past 3 years, militants have intensified violence. They've seized control of towns and villages while killing hundreds of people. Thousands have been forced to flee their homes. The number of troops to be deployed along with the timeline of their deployment has not yet been made public. Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi says his hope is for peace to return to Cabo Delgado.
Our analysis must take into account terrorist cells scattered in the region. Conscious that securing success in the fight against this scourge means safeguarding our cultural and economic values and our sovereignty. Our approach rests on the basis that terrorism is a global threat, and if we want to defeat it, we must further our understanding with the prospect of eradicating it from our entire region. I would like to assure you that in Mozambique, we are deeply aware of our responsibilities at the present moment.
The increase of violence against aid workers in the Central African Republic has been a huge concern for the United Nations. Briefing the Security Council on Wednesday, the head of the UN peacekeeping mission in the country said that there had been 225 recorded incidents of violence against aid workers in the first 5 months of this year. The widespread attacks are having a negative impact on the ability of the peacekeeping mission to implement its mandate. The coalition of Patriots for Change militants have been blamed for the violence as well as looting. The UN mission says hundreds of people in CAR are in need of assistance, as many are at risk of starvation.
I remain concerned about the negative consequences generated by the military counter-offensive of the defense and security forces and the bilateral forces and other security personnel to destroy the guerrillas imposed by the CPC. We are currently living in the center and northwest of the CAR, an asymmetrical war with the armed groups of the CPC mainly responsible for serious violations of human rights. This has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian crisis with new waves of displacement and 57% of the population requiring humanitarian assistance. The current security context also does not spare humanitarian actors who are working to alleviate a crisis exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the violence of the CPC, and the operations against it. The number of internally displaced persons has reached an unprecedented level since 2014. Forced evictions of internally displaced persons even took place in early June at a core-raising site in Bambari, a place protected by international humanitarian law.
Let's now head to China, where the country has issued a white paper on the practice of the Communist Party in respecting and protecting human rights. The document from the State Council Information Office says for 100 years, the Communist Party of China has always put people first. It says it regards the rights to subsistence and development as primary and basic human rights and believes that living a life of contentment is the ultimate human right. The white paper says China has built the world's largest social security system, covering elderly care, medical care, and social assistance. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called for closer cooperation among participants of the Belt and Road Initiative. His remarks were conveyed at a high-level video conference at the China-led initiative, which took place in Beijing on Wednesday. Sen Zhuan reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says 140 countries have signed up to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative over the past 8 years. The partnership has guided and strengthened cooperation and economic recovery amid the global pandemic.
Each party has promoted communication in policy and connecting through infrastructure, trade, finance, and people-to-people exchanges. Each has initiated collaboration that benefits the people and build a partnership via multiple spectrums. This has inspired new potential for future development.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the trade volume among the Belt and Road countries has nearly reached $1.4 trillion last year. This is thanks to collective efforts among the countries in the region to build a firewall against the coronavirus.
We've insisted on fair consultation. In the Belt and Road family, each participant is equal despite the size of its economy. Every single collaboration does not have any political preconditions. We won't impose political power on others or become threats of any nations.
China has exported and donated around 400 million doses of vaccines to around 90 countries across the globe. In the near term, the Belt and Road Initiative is focusing on vaccine development and environmental partnerships among members of the initiative. This is on top of continued collaboration in infrastructure and trade.
Asia and Pacific region is developing at the fastest speed with great potential and the most active collaboration. It takes up 60% of the world's population and 70% of the world's GDP. The region has continued to play an important role in fighting the global pandemic and boosting economic recovery. It is a place for cooperation and not a place for geopolitical chess game.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi said building a shared future that benefits all people in the Asia-Pacific region is possible, with all nations exercising the collaborative effort in fighting the pandemic to help boost economic recovery. Chen Ziyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
During the meeting, more than 24 Asian and Middle Eastern countries called for equitable and affordable COVID vaccine distribution to developing countries, as well as boosting cooperation on climate change. The signatories of the initiative include Afghanistan, China, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia. They called on Belt and Road partners to strengthen communication on vaccine supervision policies. The initiative also called for joint research in vaccine development and technology transfer to developing countries. Measures to ensure smooth transportation of vaccines between countries were also discussed. With regard to climate change, the countries also called for the implementation of the Paris Agreement and sharing of best practices. They urged the construction of environmentally friendly infrastructure that would withstand risks. They also urged an increase in cooperation on affordable renewable energy for developing countries. The Communist Party of China, CPC, is set to celebrate its centenary anniversary on 1st of July. Ahead of the event, Nigerian scholars and politicians recently joined the Chinese community in a symposium to celebrate the party's achievements. Organized by the Chinese Embassy and the Center for China Studies, the event took place at the China Cultural Center in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Chinese ambassador to Nigeria, Sui Jianchun, said the fundamental purpose of the CPC is to serve the people wholeheartedly.
The CPC is animated. The party has given birth to a spirit of a nation that has gone beyond the borders of China. Today, we can see China in our homes. We have seen your hands in our infrastructures, from railways to roads to telecommunications and all aspects of development.
The CPC adheres to its fundamental purpose of serving the people wholeheartedly and takes the people's support approval, happiness, and consent as the fundamental criterion for judging all its work. To meet the people's aspiration for a better life is the goal of CPC. Committed to serving the people and relying on the people, the CPC has won the broadest support of the Chinese people.
It's been a week since 3 Chinese takenauts took off to the core module of China's new space station. The takenauts will embark on their spacewalk in about 10 days. They will each wear a 120-kilogram extravehicular spacesuit. Life aboard the space station's core module can be physically and mentally demanding, so keeping a routine is important. The takenauts work on a normal daytime schedule to ensure they get enough sleep. Due to the non-gravity environment, daily routines like keeping up personal hygiene can be very different from how they're done here on Earth. The takenauts use wet tissues to clean their faces and use toothpaste from a small bag. With a Wi-Fi connection, they're able to control the lighting system on the space station using smart devices like cell phones and tablets. But turning to the coronavirus pandemic, Africa remains at the back of the pack in terms of COVID-19 vaccine rollout. This even as the World Health Organization warns that failure by the continent to acquire enough doses could hamper the fight against the virus. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia reports.
Well, the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines in many African countries is being held back by shortages in supply. The World Health Organization says many poorer countries do not have enough doses or have run out entirely. According to WHO, about 90% of African countries will not have reached the target of vaccinating 10% of their populations by September. This as the continent enters a third wave of the pandemic. The African continent is in dire need of an extra 225 million doses to be able to vaccinate a tenth of its population or people by September this year. According to the Africa CDC, the top 5 African countries that have led in COVID-19 vaccination include Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and South Africa. However, 3 African countries are yet to receive vaccines. They include Tanzania, Burundi, and Eritrea. Africa's vaccination coverage for the first dose remains stuck at 2% and at about 1% in sub-Saharan Africa. Most of the African countries are relying on the global vaccine sharing program known as COVAX. WHO and the Africa Centers for Disease Control have continued to urge rich nations to share their extra vaccines with Africa. The US has promised to share 8 million doses globally, roughly 15 million of which will go to Africa. China has shipped vaccines to 66 countries in the form of aid and is pledging to supply 10 million doses to the COVAX facility. Back to you.
The travel sector in the UK is protesting against the government's coronavirus restrictions. It says the restrictions have brought it to its knees and it's demanding change. Reporting from London, here is Nicole Johnson.
From airlines to travel operators, tour companies, ferries and airports, the UK tourist industry is here for a day of action. They're protesting against the British government's restrictions on international travel. People have joined in across the country, rallying at airports and outside Parliament. They're ramping up pressure on the government to make it easier for people to travel abroad for international holidays without quarantining when they come home.
Our message to the government as a travel agent is just please listen to our specific circumstances. We don't earn any money until people travel, and the lack of people travelling, we've not earned any money in 16 months.
The government has a traffic light system for travel, classifying countries as green, amber or red according to their COVID-19 risk. But right now, very few countries are green, and most of them won't accept British tourists anyway, except for Iceland.
The government tried to reintroduce the traffic light system 3-4 weeks ago with promises that they wouldn't make the same mistakes that they did the first time round, and unfortunately within 3 weeks, we had the situation where they'd moved it from green to amber with no notice for customers, and therefore you get this scramble of people trying to get back to the UK to beat the self-isolation deadline. That costs them money, it's a lot of stress for people. I think it's unfair on families.
Local operators and tour guides say the domestic travel industry is also suffering because no one wants to travel here while the UK has such strict quarantine rules.
We've been absolutely flattened. Tourists are just not coming. I've had no work since the 28th of February last year.
The travel industry is calling on the government to expand its travel green list and to extend furlough until April next year. It says that 200,000 jobs are at risk and hundreds of thousands of airline jobs as well. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. When we return, more news, including U.S. President Joe Biden announces a new plan to combat gun crime as violence spikes. And the Democratic Republic of Congo postpones the return of the remains of its independence hero, Patrice Lumumba.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. The United States continues to experience a nationwide spike in violent crime and gun violence. In the first quarter of this year, the nationwide homicide rate was 24% higher than in the same period last year. Gun-related deaths were up 21%. President Joe Biden has announced a multi-pronged plan focused on combating gun violence. It includes punishing gun dealers if necessary. Nathan King reports.
Despite the US's emergence and success in seemingly combating the pandemic and the economic revival, there has been a surge in crime. Homicides up near 25% in the first quarter of 2021 compared to the previous year, especially with guns. And as you know, the Democrats ran on gun control. They can't pass that through legislation because of the divided Senate. So what the US president is doing, Joe Biden, is allocating some of the funds or directing states to be allowed to allocate some of the funds from the COVID relief bill, $350 billion to states and local governments to combat gun crime, and also tighten up regulations when it comes to rules of gun suppliers, for example, selling illegal weapons out on the outskirts of Chicago, etc., and other cities through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. But essentially, what the president is saying here is that he's not going to be able to pass things through Congress, so they are using the executive orders and what Donald Trump did, essentially, when Congress is deadlocked, to push their agenda forward when it comes to gun crime.
Crime historically rises during the summer, and as we emerge from this pandemic, with the country opening back up again, the traditional summer spike may be more pronounced than it usually would be. In our conversation today, we talked about our strategy to supercharge what works while we continue to push the Congress to act on sensible gun violence legislation.
And we're finding that this escalation, especially in gun crime and homicides, could be a problem for Democrats when it comes to midterm elections, control of the Senate, etc. And also, if it goes on too long, Joe Biden's re-election campaign if he runs again. So this is very much on their mind. And he's facing a lot of problems domestically as well when it comes to other items. Infrastructure plan still stalled, and the American Families Plan, which subsidizes healthcare workers who homework, childcare, kindergarten and beyond. Even though he came with an ambitious agenda, he's finding that governing is a lot harder than campaigning. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has postponed the return of the remains of its independence hero, Patrice Lumumba. The country says the postponement is due to an increase in COVID-19 cases. A large nationwide ceremony had been planned for the end of this month. However, President Felix Tshisekedi has moved it to January of next year. With the details, here's CGTN's Chris Chamaringa.
The return of the remains of Congolese independence hero Patrice Lumumba has been delayed due to a surge in coronavirus cases. Belgian authorities were supposed to hand over a tooth believed to be Lumumba's only remains this month, but the event was postponed to January next year. Many Congolese are nonetheless excited to hear that the Belgian government has agreed to hand over the remains of their first Prime Minister.
We've won the battle because Belgium has accepted to return Patrice Emery Lumumba's remains. The person who kept his remains was a Belgian officer who was sent to work in the Congo. He is the one who killed him. The Belgians ended his political career and his life.
Patrice Lumumba was assassinated in 1961 by Congolese rebels backed by Belgium for his anti-colonial stance. In 2002, Belgium admitted responsibility for its part in his killing. His body is reported to have been dissolved in acid by a Belgian police officer. Only his tooth is said to have been recovered and kept by the Belgian officer's family. Some Congolese activists say the decision to return the tooth is not worth celebrating.
Donc toza na esengo te tango criminel assassin.
We are not happy to hear that a criminal, an assassin, is returning Lumumba's tooth instead of his body. This is an insult to Congolese people and Africans in general. We will continue putting pressure on the Belgian government until it returns his body to us.
The DRC government had planned a large ceremony to honor Lumumba during the country's independence anniversary on June 30th. But a third wave of COVID-19 infections changed that plan.
Very large crowds were expected to attend the burial of the remains of Patrice Lumumba in the capital, Kinshasa. The city has the highest number of COVID-19 cases. The event has been postponed to January next year, when the country will mark the 61st anniversary of Lumumba's death. Chris Chamaringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
We turn our attention to Kenya now, where decades after the end of colonial rule, many elderly veterans of the Mau Mau uprising say they are yet to receive compensation for years of torture and abuse. The Mau Mau in the 1950s fought against British domination until Kenya's independence. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy spoke to one of the movement's surviving members.
Jane Muthoni is one of the original claimants in the Mau Mau compensation case against Britain. She estimates her age at between 82 and 86. Like many others, Muthoni endured mistreatment under British colonial rule during the Mau Mau insurgency.
They subjected us to forced labor without basic hygiene and amenities, diseases, and other degrading treatment, including a loss of dignity and frequent beatings.
In 2009, Jane Muthoni traveled to London alongside other war veterans to seek justice.
In 2013, Britain apologized and accepted to pay compensation to veterans like Jane Muthoni, who was arrested and detained for 3 years.
The settlement for 5,228 claimants was to the tune of over $31 million. But more than 8 years later, Muthoni says she is yet to receive any compensation.
She never got the money because there is nothing that she did with that money, and we could see if the money was there, we could have noticed because she could have done something here.
Muthoni and her grandchildren say they will continue to follow up with the authorities for a positive outcome. The Mau Mau insurgency from 1952 through 1960 helped to accelerate Kenya's independence. During the uprising, some 150,000 Kenyans were held in detention camps in what was then British East Africa. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Kenya's economy largely depends on rain-fed agriculture. There are fears, though, that illegal charcoal burning now poses a threat to food production and exports. CGTN's Nick Mudimba caught up with charcoal producers in Kenya's coastal region. His report includes how their economic interests are clashing with the country's environmental protection goals.
Droughts have continuously threatened Kenya's food security, and one of the practices affecting water catchment areas is charcoal burning. We meet Franklin Katana in Kenya's Kilifi County. He has been in the charcoal burning business for more than 20 years now. He says it has provided for him economically, but this has come at a cost.
Burning charcoal is very dangerous to one's health because of the dirt, and we sometimes get respiratory diseases.